The late September sun hung low over Highway 89, casting long shadows across the asphalt as Emma Cortez navigated the winding road north of Flagstaff. The San Francisco peaks loomed in the distance, their slopes already dusted with early snow that caught the amber light like fire. She'd been driving for 3 hours straight, her hands tight on the wheel of her aging Honda Civic, trying to outrun the argument she'd had with her sister that morning. The air through her cracked window carried the scent of ponderosa pine and high desert sage, cool and clean in a way that made her lungs ache. She loved this stretch of Arizona, the way the landscape shifted from red rock to alpine forest, how the elevation made everything feel lighter, more possible. She'd come here to clear her head, to put distance between herself and the suffocating expectations of her family in Phoenix. She didn't see the deer until it was too late. It appeared at the edge of the tree line like a ghost, all lean muscle and wild eyes, frozen in that terrible moment of indecision. Emma's foot slammed the brake, her body lurching forward against the seatbelt as the car fishtailed. The deer bolted, but her overcompensation sent the Civic careening toward the shoulder. She felt the sickening crunch of gravel, the vehicle spinning once before the rear end clipped the guardrail with a sound like thunder. Then silence. Her heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her throat. Steam hissed from beneath the crumpled hood, wisps of it catching the fading sunlight. The airbag hadn't deployed, the impact hadn't been severe enough, but her hands shook on the steering wheel, knuckles white and aching. Through the windshield, she watched the sky bleed from gold to deep orange, the first stars beginning to pierce the darkening blue. She fumbled for her phone. No signal. Of course not. This far north of town, coverage was spotty at best, and the accident had left her in a dead zone between cell towers. The road stretched empty in both directions, that peculiar high country stillness settling over everything like a held breath. Emma pushed open the door and stepped onto unsteady legs. The September air bit at her skin, colder now that the sun was dying. She wrapped her arms around herself, her thin cardigan doing nothing against the chill. The car was totaled, even she could see that. The rear quarter panel was crushed, one taillight shattered into crystalline fragments across the asphalt, and something vital was leaking from the engine in a slow, dark trickle. She was alone, vulnerable, and night was coming fast. The sound of an engine made her turn, hope flaring bright in her chest. But what she saw made that hope catch and transform into something more complicated, edged with an instinctive wariness she couldn't quite name. A motorcycle emerged from the twilight, like something out of a fever dream, its single headlight cutting through the gathering dusk. Not just any motorcycle, a Harley-Davidson, its chrome catching the last light, its engine a deep, throbbing growl that she felt in her sternum. And the man riding it wore the unmistakable cuts of a Hell's Angel, the winged death's head visible even from a distance. Emma's breath caught. She'd grown up on stories about motorcycle clubs, the violence and lawlessness that supposedly followed them like a shadow. Her father had warned her about men like this, dangerous, unpredictable, living by their own rules. Every instinct told her to be afraid. But he was slowing down. The Harley pulled onto the shoulder 20 feet from her disabled car, its engine rumbling into silence. The rider dismounted with a fluid grace that seemed at odds with his size. He was tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of controlled power that suggested strength held carefully in check. His boots hit the gravel with solid authority, and when he straightened, Emma felt something in her stomach twist. He was older than her by at least 15 years, maybe 40 or 42, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that spoke of a life lived outdoors. Dark hair, longer on top and graying at the temples, stubble shadowing a strong jaw. The leather vest, his cuts, bore patches she didn't fully understand. Nomad, various rally pins, the Arizona bottom rocker, but it was his eyes that held her, dark and steady, assessing the scene with a focus that made her feel simultaneously exposed and strangely safe. "You hurt?" His voice was low, rough-edged, the kind of voice that didn't waste words. Emma shook her head, then immediately regretted the motion as a wave of dizziness washed through her. Her hand went to her temple, fingers pressing against skin that felt too hot. He moved then, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides. His hand came to her shoulder, firm, steadying, the leather of his glove warm from the ride. The touch sent an electric current through her, unexpected and unsettling. "Easy," he said, and there was something in his tone that made her want to obey, to trust this stranger who smelled of motorcycle exhaust and leather and something indefinably masculine. "You hit your head?" "I don't think so. I just—" Her voice sounded thin to her own ears. The deer came out of nowhere. His eyes tracked over her face, searching for signs of injury with an intensity that made her skin flush. Then he turned to survey the wreckage, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. The dying light carved shadows beneath his cheekbones, made his expression harder to read. "Your car's not going anywhere," he said flatly, "and you shouldn't be standing out here in the cold. Shock's gonna hit you soon if it hasn't already." As if his words conjured it, Emma felt the first violent shiver race through her body. Her teeth started to chatter, and she wrapped her arms tighter around herself, suddenly aware of how inadequate her clothing was for the dropping temperature. Without a word, he shrugged out of his leather jacket, not the vest with the patches, but the heavy riding jacket beneath it. The movement revealed a black T-shirt stretched across a chest and arms that spoke of hard physical labor, the kind of strength that came from using your body, not from a gym. He draped the jacket over her shoulders, and the weight of it, the lingering heat of his body, the scent of leather and motor oil, and something uniquely him, enveloped her like a shield. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emma." It came out as barely more than a whisper. "I'm Kane." He said it simply, as if the name should mean something. Maybe in certain circles it did. "You got anyone you can call?" She showed him her phone, the no-service message stark on the screen. He pulled his own from his pocket, a battered iPhone in a heavy-duty case, and frowned at the same result. "We're in a dead zone here. Nearest town with a signal's probably 20 miles north." His eyes moved to the darkening highway, calculating. "I can ride ahead, make the call, send someone back for you. But that's going to take time, and you'll be alone out here for at least an hour." The thought of being left here, alone in the dark with a destroyed car and no way to call for help, made panic flutter in her chest. But what was the alternative? Get on the back of a stranger's motorcycle? A Hell's Angels motorcycle? Kane seemed to read her hesitation. He took a step back, giving her space, his hands loose at his sides in a gesture that was somehow both respectful and deliberately non-threatening. "Or you can ride with me. I'll take you to a diner up the road, place called Betty's. You can use their phone, warm up, wait for help there instead of freezing your ass off on the shoulder." He paused, his dark eyes meeting hers with a directness that stole her breath. "Your choice, Emma, but you need to make it now. Temperature's gonna drop fast once the sun's fully down." She looked at him, really looked at him, at the scars on his knuckles visible even in the fading light, the way he stood between her and the road as if shielding her from traffic that hadn't come, the leather vest with its symbols of brotherhood and rebellion. Everything she'd been taught told her this was dangerous, but his eyes were steady, patient, waiting for her decision without pressure, without manipulation. And there was something in the way he'd touched her shoulder, in the way he'd given her his jacket, that spoke of a code she didn't fully understand, but found herself wanting to trust. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Take me to Betty's." Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but a softening around his eyes that made him look almost gentle. He nodded once, decisive, and turned toward his Harley. The Harley sat gleaming in the last light, all chrome and black paint and barely contained power. Emma had never been on a motorcycle before. The machine looked massive up close, intimidating in its mechanical complexity, and the thought of climbing onto it, of pressing her body against Kane's back, sent a thrill through her that had nothing to do with fear. Kane swung his leg over the bike with practiced ease, settling into the saddle like it was an extension of himself. He turned to look at her over his shoulder, and in the gathering darkness, his eyes were almost black. "Come here," he said, and it wasn't a request. Emma approached on shaking legs, the jacket heavy on her shoulders. Up close, she could see the detail she'd missed before. The silver rings on his fingers, the tattoo that disappeared beneath his t-shirt sleeve, the way his jeans sat low on his hips, held by a leather belt with a buckle that caught the dying light. "Left foot on the peg," he instructed, his voice low and steady. "Swing your right leg over, don't be shy about it." She did as he said, her movements awkward and uncertain. The seat put her higher than she expected, and suddenly she was there, straddling the bike behind him, her thighs bracketing his hips. The position was intimate in a way that made heat pool low in her belly. "Arms around my waist," Kane said, and she heard something in his voice that hadn't been there before, a roughness, an edge. "Hold on tight. When I lean, you lean with me. Don't fight the bike." Emma hesitated only a moment before sliding her arms around him. Her palms pressed flat against his abdomen, and even through the t-shirt she could feel the solid muscle, the heat of him, the way his breath expanded his ribcage. He was all hard planes and controlled strength, and being this close to him, touching him like this, made something primal wake up inside her. The engine roared to life, vibration traveling up through the frame and into her body. Kane's hand covered both of hers where they rested on his stomach, pressing them more firmly against him, adjusting her grip. "Tighter," he said over the rumble of the engine. "I need to feel you there." She tightened her hold, her cheek almost touching his shoulder blade, and felt him nod in approval. Then they were moving. The acceleration pressed her back against the sissy bar for a heartbeat before she leaned into him, her front molding to his back, her arms locked around his waist. The wind hit her face cold and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and asphalt and the ozone smell of approaching night. Kane handled the bike with absolute confidence, his body shifting with the curves of the road in a way that forced her to follow, to trust his movements, to surrender to the rhythm he set. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was the most alive she'd felt in months. The highway unreeled before them, the white lines strobing past, the forest pressing in dark on either side. Above, the first stars were bright and cold, and the moon was rising fat and orange over the peaks. Emma closed her eyes and just felt the power of the machine beneath her, the solid warmth of Kane's body against hers, the way the wind tried to tear her away, and his presence anchored her. She understood, suddenly, why people rode. It wasn't about transportation. It was about this, the freedom, the danger, the way it stripped everything down to the essential, speed and balance and trust. 20 minutes passed in what felt like both seconds and hours. When Kane finally slowed, downshifting with a series of throttle blips that made the engine growl, Emma lifted her head and saw lights ahead. Betty's diner sat like an oasis in the darkness, a 1950s-era chrome and neon building that looked transported from another era. Half a dozen vehicles filled the parking lot, trucks mostly, and 2 other motorcycles. Kane guided the Harley into a spot near the entrance and killed the engine. The sudden silence felt profound, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and the muffled sounds of life from inside the diner. Emma loosened her grip on his waist, suddenly self-conscious about how tightly she'd been holding him, how her body had molded to his. "You good?" Kane asked, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet. "Yeah," she managed, though her legs felt like water when she tried to dismount. She got her right leg over, but stumbled on the landing, and Kane was there instantly, one hand on her elbow, steadying her. "Takes a minute to get your land legs back," he said, and there might have been amusement in his tone. "First time on a bike? That obvious? You held on like you were afraid I'd evaporate." He said it without mockery, just stating fact. His hand remained on her elbow, warm even through his jacket sleeve. "But you moved with the bike. That's good. Some people fight it, make it dangerous." Emma became aware that they were standing very close, that his hand was still on her arm, that his eyes were on her face with that same intensity that made her feel transparent. The parking lot light cast harsh shadows across his features, turning him into something between man and myth. "Come on," he said, finally releasing her. "Let's get you inside." The diner's warmth hit Emma like a wave when Kane pulled open the door, the smell of coffee and frying bacon and pie making her stomach clench with sudden hunger. The interior was exactly what the exterior promised. Red vinyl booths, black and white checkered floor, a long counter with chrome stools, and a jukebox in the corner playing some classic country song she didn't quite recognize. Several heads turned when they entered. Emma saw the quick assessments, the way eyes moved from Kane's cuts to her face to the jacket she wore that was obviously his, making calculations she could only guess at. But Kane either didn't notice or didn't care. He moved through the space with the confidence of a man who'd long ago stopped worrying about what strangers thought. "Kane!" The voice came from behind the counter, a woman in her 60s with steel-grey hair and sharp blue eyes, her name tag reading Betty. "Haven't seen you in a couple weeks. Thought maybe you'd finally gotten smart and moved somewhere warm." "Betty?" Kane's voice held genuine warmth, and Emma saw something in his expression soften in a way she hadn't seen before. "Never gonna happen. You know I can't stay away from your pie." Betty's eyes cut to Emma, assessing, and Emma felt herself being measured by someone who'd probably seen it all and wasn't easily impressed. "Friend of yours?" Betty asked, but there was a knowing quality to the question that made Emma's cheeks heat. "Helped her out with some car trouble on 89, Kane said simply. "She needs to use your phone, make some calls." "Phone's in the back, honey." Betty gestured toward a hallway past the restrooms. "Take your time." But Kane shook his head. "Let me make the call first. Get a tow arranged. Then you can call whoever's going to worry about you." It was presumptuous, taking over like that, making decisions for her. Emma should have been annoyed. Instead, she found herself grateful, relieved to let someone else handle the logistics while she tried to process everything that had happened in the last hour. She watched Kane disappear down the hallway, his broad shoulders filling the narrow space, and felt Betty's eyes on her again. "You okay, sweetheart?" The older woman's voice had gentled. "He didn't. You're here because you want to be, right?" Emma understood what she was really asking. "Yes, I'm okay. He stopped to help after my accident. He's been nothing but decent." Betty nodded slowly. "Kane's good people. Known him about 10 years now, ever since he started running this route. Looks like trouble, I know, but he's the kind who stops when someone needs help." She paused. "Doesn't bring women in here often, though. Actually, can't remember the last time." Emma didn't know what to do with that information, so she said nothing. Betty poured her a cup of coffee, without asking, black and strong, and pushed it across the counter. "On the house. You look like you need it." The coffee was perfect, hot and bitter and grounding. Emma wrapped her hands around the mug and let the warmth seep into her fingers, watching condensation form on the window beside the booth where she'd settled. Outside, the night was fully dark now, the parking lot lights creating small islands of illumination in an ocean of black. Kane returned after a few minutes, sliding into the booth across from her with a fluid economy of movement. This close, under the diner's lights, she could see him more clearly. The fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the scar that bisected his left eyebrow, the way his hands rested on the table, scarred knuckles and calloused palms, speaking of years of hard work. "Tow truck's coming," he said. "Buddy of mine runs a garage in Flagstaff. He'll get your car, store it until you figure out what you want to do with it." His dark eyes met hers. "Probably totaled, based on what I saw. You got insurance?" "Yeah." Emma's voice sounded small. The reality of the situation was starting to settle on her. The car destroyed, stranded hours from home, dependent on the kindness of a stranger who wore a death's head on his back. "You need to call someone? Family? Boyfriend? Someone who's going to be worried?" "My sister. She's in Phoenix." Kane gestured toward the hallway. "Phone's all yours." The call to Maria was predictably difficult. Her sister's voice went sharp with concern. demanding details, asking questions Emma didn't have answers to. Yes, she was okay. No, she wasn't hurt. Yes, someone was helping her. No, she didn't know exactly when she'd be home. "Who's helping you?" Maria demanded. "Emma, where are you?" "A diner called Betty's, north of Flagstaff, and I'm with—" She paused, unsure how to explain Kane. "Someone stopped to help. He's been really kind." The skepticism in Maria's silence was loud. "Emma, I'm fine, Murray, I promise. I'll call you tomorrow when I know more about the car, okay?" She ended the call before her sister could interrogate her further, and stood for a moment in the dim hallway, collecting herself. Through the wall, she could hear the muffled sounds of the diner, conversation, the clink of silverware, the jukebox cycling to a new song. When she returned to the booth, there was food waiting. A burger and fries for her, the same for Kane, and 2 slices of apple pie that smelled like cinnamon and butter. "You didn't have to. You need to eat," Kane said, already halfway through his burger. "Shock and cold burn calories, and you're shaking." Emma looked down at her hands and realized he was right. A fine tremor ran through her fingers, adrenaline finally ebbing and leaving exhaustion in its wake. She picked up the burger and took a bite, and the taste exploded across her tongue, salt and fat and perfectly charred beef. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until that moment. They ate in silence for a while, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Kane ate with the focused attention he seemed to bring to everything, and Emma found herself watching him, the way his jaw worked, the way his throat moved when he swallowed, the unconscious grace in his movements. "You never asked," she said suddenly. He looked up, one eyebrow raised in question. "Where I was going, why I was out here alone. Most people would have asked." Kane wiped his mouth with a paper napkin, considering. "Figured you'd tell me if you wanted me to know. Figured if you were running from something dangerous, you wouldn't have gotten on my bike." His eyes held hers. "Were you running from something dangerous?" "Just myself, I guess. My family. Expectations." Emma laughed, but it came out bitter. "Sounds dramatic when I say it out loud." "Doesn't sound dramatic. Sounds human." Kane leaned back in the booth, and the vinyl creaked under his weight. "Everyone runs from something sometimes. Question is what you're running toward." "I don't know," Emma admitted. "I thought I'd figure it out on the drive, but then then life happened," Kane finished. "It does that. Reminds you that you're not in control as much as you think you are." There was something in his voice, some weight of experience that made Emma bold. "You sound like you know something about that." His smile was brief, more a quirk of his lips than anything else. "I know something about most things. Learned the hard way, usually." "The club?" She gestured at his vest, hung carefully over the back of the booth. "Is that the hard way?" Kane's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A wariness, maybe, or a calculation. "The club's family. Been my family longer than my blood relatives have, but yeah, it's taught me things. About loyalty, about what matters." He paused. "About the difference between danger and risk." "What's the difference?" "Danger's something that can hurt you. Risk is choosing to face it anyway, because what you might gain is worth it." His eyes never left hers. "You took a risk tonight, getting on my bike." Emma's mouth went dry. "Did I? Maybe. Haven't decided yet if I'm dangerous or just risky." The words hung between them, charged with something Emma couldn't quite name. The air felt thicker suddenly, the noise of the diner fading, until all she could hear was her own heartbeat and the low rumble of Kane's voice. "I should," she gestured vaguely at the pie, "I should probably eat this before it gets cold." Kane's smile this time was real, reaching his eyes and transforming his face into something almost boyish. "Pie doesn't get cold, Emma. It gets perfect." They finished their pie slowly, the conversation drifting to safer topics, the best routes through the high country, Betty's infamous reputation among bikers, the way the seasons changed in northern Arizona. Kane talked about the road the way some people talked about art, with a reverence that spoke of genuine passion. Emma found herself leaning forward, drawn in by the rough cadence of his voice, the occasional hand gesture that punctuated a point. The diner had emptied out while they talked, the other patrons filtering away until it was just them and Betty, who was wiping down the counter with practiced efficiency. The clock above the register read almost 10:30. "Tow truck should be here soon," Kane said, checking his phone. "Tommy texted. He's got your car loaded, heading back to his garage. Said he'll call you tomorrow with an estimate." "I should probably find a hotel," Emma said, though the thought of navigating the logistics made her want to curl up in the booth and sleep. "Is there anything nearby?" Kane's hesitation was brief, but noticeable. "There's a motel about 5 miles north. Nothing fancy, but it's clean." Another pause. "Or there's my place." Emma's heart kicked hard against her ribs. "Your place. I've got a cabin about 15 minutes from here. Guest room, separate bathroom. You'd have your own space." His eyes were steady on hers, reading her reaction. "Not trying to. I'm just offering a roof and a bed. You've had a hell of a day. Might be easier than dealing with a motel." Every rational thought in Emma's head screamed that this was a bad idea. She didn't know this man. He was a Hell's Angel. She'd be alone with him in an isolated cabin. Everything about it violated every safety rule she'd ever been taught, but she'd been safe her whole life. Safe and predictable and so carefully controlled that she'd driven 3 hours into the mountains just to escape the suffocation of it. And Kane had been nothing but honorable, protective even, in a way that felt both old-fashioned and essential. "Okay," she heard herself say, "if you're sure it's not an imposition." Something flickered in Kane's expression, surprise maybe, or satisfaction. "It's not." They settled the bill with Betty, who gave Emma a long look that might have been approval or warning or both. "You take care of yourself, honey," she said, and Emma couldn't tell if she was talking to her or Kane. Outside, the temperature had dropped another 10 degrees. Emma's breath plumed white in the parking lot lights, and she pulled Kane's jacket tighter around herself. The Harley sat waiting, chrome gleaming, patient as a predator. "Same as before," Kane said, swinging his leg over. "Hold tight, move with me." This time, when Emma climbed on behind him, the intimacy of it felt different, less terrifying, more intentional. She wrapped her arms around his waist and pressed close, her cheek against his shoulder blade, and felt him cover her hands with one of his own, just for a moment, a gesture of acknowledgement or reassurance. The ride was shorter than before, the bike eating up the dark miles with mechanical efficiency. Kane turned off the highway onto a dirt road that wound up into the forest, the headlight picking out pine trees and scrub oak. They climbed for several minutes before the cabin appeared, a low structure of wood and stone, windows dark, surrounded by tall trees that whispered in the wind. Kane parked near the porch and killed the engine. In the sudden silence, Emma could hear the forest, the rustle of branches, the distant call of an owl, the settle and tick of the cooling bike. Stars blazed overhead, brilliant and cold, more than she'd ever seen in Phoenix. "Welcome to my castle," Kane said, and there was dry humor in his voice. He dismounted and offered her his hand. Emma took it, his palm rough against hers, and let him help her off the bike. Her legs were steadier this time, but she didn't immediately release his hand. Neither did he. They stood like that for a heartbeat, hands clasped, eyes meeting in the darkness. Then Kane squeezed once and let go, turning toward the cabin. The interior was exactly what Emma had expected, and nothing like it at the same time. Rustic, yes. Exposed beams, a stone fireplace, wood floors worn smooth by years of use, but also unexpectedly neat, almost minimalist. A leather couch faced the fireplace, a bookshelf lined one wall, and through an open doorway she could see a kitchen that looked functional if basic. "Guest rooms through there," Kane said, gesturing to a hallway. "Bathrooms attached. Towels are in the cabinet. Make yourself at home." He moved to the fireplace and began building a fire with the kind of practiced ease that suggested he'd done it 1,000 times. Emma watched the play of muscle beneath his t-shirt as he stacked kindling, struck a match, coaxed flame from tinder. The fire caught and grew, throwing dancing shadows across the walls. Kane straightened and turned to face her, and in the firelight he looked almost mythic, all sharp angles and controlled power, his eyes catching the flames and throwing them back. He reached up and slowly began pulling off his gloves, one finger at a time, the leather peeling away to reveal his hands. Emma couldn't look away. His hands were a map of his life, scarred knuckles that had clearly been broken more than once, calluses thick on his palms and the pads of his fingers, a burn mark along the side of his right hand that looked old and permanent. They were working hands, fighting hands, hands that knew both creation and destruction. They were beautiful in their brutal functionality. He set the gloves on the mantel with deliberate care, and Emma realized she'd been holding her breath. There was something about the gesture, the slow reveal, the intimacy of it, that felt more naked than if he'd stripped off his shirt. These were the hands that had steadied her at the accident site, that had covered hers on the bike, that had just built a fire to warm her. "You're staring," Kane said quietly. "Sorry, Emma swallowed hard. "Your hands, they're ugly." He said it without self-pity, just stating what he assumed was fact. "No, they're honest." She took a step closer, drawn by something she didn't fully understand. "They look like they've lived." Kane's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "They've done things I'm not proud of. Broken things, hurt people who deserved it, and maybe some who didn't." His voice dropped lower. "They're not gentle hands, Emma. They were gentle with me," she said. The words hung between them, and Emma saw something shift in Kane's expression, the careful control he'd maintained all evening cracking just slightly. He took a breath, his chest expanding, and when he spoke, his voice was rough. "You should go to bed. It's late and you've been through a lot." But Emma didn't move. She was tired of being safe, tired of doing what she should. The accident had shaken something loose in her, and standing here in this cabin, with this man who'd saved her and fed her and offered her shelter without asking for anything in return, she felt more awake than she had in years. "What if I don't want to go to bed?" The boldness in her voice surprised her. Kane went very still. "Emma, you said risk is choosing to face danger because what you might gain is worth it." She took another step closer. "What if you're worth the risk? You don't know me." His voice was strained now, control fraying at the edges. "You don't know what I am. I know you stopped when someone needed help. I know you gave me your jacket in the cold. I know you've been nothing but honorable." She was close enough now to feel the heat radiating off him, to see the pulse beating at the base of his throat. "I know I feel safer with you than I've felt with anyone in a long time." "Emma," her name was a warning and a plea. "I'm trying to be decent here. Maybe I don't want decent." She reached out and placed her hand flat against his chest, felt his heart hammering beneath her palm. "Maybe I want real." Kane's control snapped. His hand came up to cover hers, pressing it harder against his chest, his other hand sliding into her hair, tilting her face up to his. His eyes searched hers, dark and desperate. "Last chance to walk away," he said. Emma rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was nothing like she'd imagined. His mouth was hot and demanding, his stubble rough against her skin, his hands, those scarred, honest hands, cradling her face with a gentleness that made her ache. He kissed like he rode, with complete focus and controlled power, and Emma felt herself melting into him, her hands fisting in his t-shirt, pulling him closer. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. Kane rested his forehead against hers, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "You're gonna wreck me," he said, and it sounded like a confession. "Good," Emma whispered. "Wreck me back." His laugh was low and dark, and then he was kissing her again, walking her backward toward the couch, his hands never leaving her body. They collapsed onto the leather together, Emma straddling his lap, his hands spanning her waist, sliding beneath his jacket that she still wore. "This," he said against her mouth, tugging at the jacket. "Off." She shrugged out of it, and Kane tossed it aside before pulling her back down, his mouth finding the curve of her neck, teeth grazing skin that had never felt so sensitive. Emma's hands explored the breadth of his shoulders, the solid muscle of his arms, the rough texture of his jaw. "Your hands," she said breathlessly. "I can't stop thinking about your hands." Kane pulled back just enough to look at her, his eyes black with desire. He held up his right hand, scarred and calloused and perfect, and Emma took it, bringing it to her lips, kissing each knuckle, the burn scar, the center of his palm. "Emma." Her name was reverent in his mouth. "You sure about this?" She guided his hand to her face, leaning into his palm, holding his gaze. "I've never been more sure of anything." And then there were no more words, just the crackle of the fire and the sound of their breathing, and the feeling of finally being exactly where she needed to be, safe in the hands of a dangerous man who'd stopped to help a stranger on a dark highway and in doing so had saved them both.